Hello! So, a Lord of the Rings anime just came out, and guess who dragged their friends to go see it because they're a huge Tolkien fan? Yep, that's me right here. An honest warning, this entire video is just a spoiler after spoiler after spoiler. You have been warned. Overall, my opinion leans more towards positive rather than negative, but I need to get the negative stuff off my chest first, so let's start with that. I have three main issues with this movie, two of which can be considered quite big ones, but I don't think they're anything I can't look past if I try hard enough. Issue number 1. The budget for the background 3D animation was way too big, while the budget for the 2D animation of the characters was way too small. Or at least the two were very visibly unbalanced. So the background and foreground didn't blend at all, especially in the first few minutes where there are a lot of zoomed out scenes. The contrast between the two was really striking and it sometimes hurt my eyes to look at. It was very reminiscent of the old Cartoon Network cartoons where you could tell which object a character would move next because it was drawn in a much simpler, less painterly style. But I want to make it clear that I don't think the animation was bad per se. I think it was just mismatched and unbalanced. Because the backgrounds themselves were beautiful, if we're talking only about the background visuals, they could aim to match the kind of scenic feeling the Lord of the Rings trilogy had. And the 2D animation wasn't bad itself, but the contrast between the highly detailed background and simplified forms of the characters was just way too big. Issue number 2. I know the director of this movie works in anime industry, but to me, as I was watching it, it felt like the person directing the movie wasn't directing an anime. It felt like they were directing what they would like a movie with real people to look like. And the two, an anime and a movie with actors, are two very different sorts of mediums in my opinion. The medium of an anime, due to being drawn, allows for a better, or rather more drastic use of conveying emotions. It allows to make the scenes more dramatic without making it look unnatural, because you're not looking at real people, and therefore it doesn't feel as awkward to have certain close-up shots or transitions. Animated productions are very much about exaggerations that wouldn't work in a movie with real actors, but War of Rohirrim didn't do that. Instead, you had a lot, and I mean a lot, of static shots that were meant to be dramatic because the music used in them was dramatic and the way the voice acting was done was conveying the same type of feeling, but the visuals just didn't stand up to that level. They were shot in a way that if it was real people, the actors would have been able to convey those emotions through micro expressions that just aren't usually done in animation. It would have been conveyed in having a real, not drawn background, lighting that would differ because it's real, the small movements of the curtains in the background, or even the clothes on the actors or their hair, and all of those could be potentially expressed in an anime form too, but they just weren't. Instead, there were static shots of characters that barely moved or didn't move at all. The best way I can explain why I think it wasn't directed as an animated movie in mind is this. If you take an anime, any anime really, and replace the animation with real actors, aka live action basically, 99% of time it's going to be not good at best, usually it's just shit. But in the same way, if you took this entire movie and changed the 2D characters to real actors without changing any of the scenes or any of shots, we're keeping everything exactly the same but with real actors, it would have been a great movie. Everything the medium of anime could have added to it was underutilized at best, and mostly just not used at all. And my issue number 3, which is also the least significant one, the beginning was just way too quick and too out of context. And I don't mean it in a if you didn't read the books you would never understand the kind of way. There was an introductory narrative in the first few seconds or minutes, but the plot in the first, 20 minutes progressed just way too fast. New characters were coming in without actually being introduced or given context. The dialogues felt unnatural and rushed. Overall, the pacing of the first 15 to 20 minutes was just too fast. You're introduced to this girl that you're told is a quote-unquote wild spirit, and then, oh bam, she's a princess sitting in a pretty dress next to her father, and then bam, some guy acts arrogant in front of a king, and bam, a conflict happens within like the first sentence being spoken, and bam, one of them dies, and then someone's throwing a tantrum, to put it simply. Like, I get that time constraints are a thing, and not everyone likes or can tell a story at such a relaxed pace like Tolkien did with his books, but that was too much. But, to me, personally, that was just the first 20 minutes or so. So now on to why I actually did have a good time with it. Coming back to my issue number 3. While the first 20 minutes of it felt rushed and I was really skeptical if I'd even enjoy this movie at all, the rest of it, basically everything after the first big battle and the fire, was much better. The pacing was slowed down, the dialogues and interactions between characters felt more natural, To me, after that fire, nothing really felt rushed or too slow. One development led to another in a logical way. The transitions between the different parts of the movie were done well. Once they got to the place in the mountain, I began to feel interested and even invested in the movie and the plot that it was telling, and that feeling held up until the very end. About issue number 2, about the directing of it being more targeted for real people rather than animation, that was true throughout the entire movie. But there were some scenes where they tried to use animation to make it more epic, let's say. The scene where Hera is riding a horse through a forest while escaping from a certain beast, that's some very interesting directing that I don't think would have been possible with a real horse. It was brief, but it was good while it lasted. I liked the animation of the eagle's flight, as long as I didn't pay too much attention to the background. And also the final sword fight was done quite well. I do think it could have been better, but to me it was good enough. Much better than the short fight at the very beginning of the movie at least. As for my first issue, the discrepancy between the background and foreground, that was also an issue throughout the entire movie. But it wasn't as bad in the second half, because the shots in the keep and of the fighting were much more zoomed in and focused on the characters rather than on showing off the background visuals, and they were also darker in color. You could still see the difference, and if you focus on it too much, it was a lot. But in my case, I got invested in the story in the later half enough to mostly ignore the glaring contrast. But I understand if anyone thought it too much. The friend I went with was like that too. Another thing I did like was Hera's character. I don't dislike warrior princess trope. I'm a huge fan of Xena the Warrior Princess series, but I'm glad Hera's character was taken in a slightly different direction. Yes, she is shown to be a skilled warrior and she wants to fight to protect her home and her people, but it's never the unbelievable and generic kind. She doesn't sneak out to fight alongside her brothers and somehow manages to outfight everyone by herself. When she does get attacked, she doesn't just win in 2 swings because she's also powerful and everyone else is weak. She struggles a fair share while still being strong to a believable degree in the sort of situation she was put in. She's brave, but she's not the all-knowing, all-powerful hero. In the end, she won because she outskilled her opponent, but also because the gamble she took paid off. Had it not paid off, she wouldn't have made it because she wasn't meant to be the sole and only hero, and I really like that. The only issue I had with her character are more of a pet peeves than anything else. Her shoes are one of them, because that was just fan service, wasn't it? And don't get me wrong, I appreciate some degree of fan service because yeah, I do like looking at Pretty Woman, but she was literally the only person to wear such footwear. Everyone else, even the other woman that was also fighting alongside her, wore normal knee-high shoes. There was no need whatsoever to make Hera stand out so much. Her color palette was already different enough to make sure everyone knows she's the main character. Please just give her normal shoes. It wouldn't make her any less appealing visually. I promise she was pretty enough. And the other pet peeve, that fight in the bridal dress was a bit corny, I have to admit. But it was very anime-esque and quite frankly, also very Tolkien-esque, since fantasy in itself can be quite corny. It looked pretty and all, but again, I think that if they'd gone for a more anime-esque type of directing for the entire movie, it wouldn't have stood out as much. But with the type of directing the movie had, it was a bit much for me. But that's a small thing compared to everything else, and at the end of the day, I watch enough anime to not be bothered by it too much. Oh, and one more thing that actually made me smile. You know the "I am no man" quote from Return of the King? They didn't use it in this movie, of course, but there was a quote that was kind of similar, and I think it was meant as a reference to the original trilogy, especially given whose voice narrates the movie. I don't know, it's a small detail, but it made me appreciate it. So I've actually read a few reviews this movie got online, and on one hand, I find it funny that people are very split about their opinions. I see a lot of extreme reactions, like extremely good or extremely bad ones, and honestly, I do see where both sides are coming from. I know I talked a lot about my issues with it, but if I were to pick, I'd choose to be in the middle of those extreme opinions, but leaning more towards a positive reaction. Because my first reaction after walking out of the cinema was, yeah, I had fun. However, there is one aspect of quite a few of those negative reviews I've seen online that really irks me off. Not all of them do this, and like I said, there are things to criticize about this movie, but what annoyed me the most was people making a point that basically boils down to, oh, but this isn't like the trilogy. Like, yeah, no shit. The Lord of the Rings trilogy was, back when it came out, and still is, a cinematic masterpiece. Many, if not most, of the high-budget actor movies coming out of Hollywood nowadays can't hold a candle to it, even though they have bigger budgets and are filmed with modern equipment. The original trilogy was just that good. Comparing a project that was like a first attempt or a trial of using anime for Lord of the Ring franchise to something of such high standard isn't fair in my opinion. It's not the same medium anymore, not a movie with actors. It wasn't fully written by Tolkien, like Lord of the Rings or Hobbit were. It was based on what, 1 page, 2 pages from an appendix? Of course it's going to be different. People having too high expectations for it are something that was predictable, so I don't even blame anyone for having a very emotional first response to it. But let's be reasonable. Yes, I do think the War of Rohirrim is worse than the original trilogy, but at the same time, I'm also not sure if I'd be able to name more than a few movies that I think are better or on par with it. I also think starting off with a full movie may have been an overkill as a way of testing the waters, because anime adaptations of series based on Western media, whether they be actual adaptations or just stories loosely based on them, can work. I think the anime series from the Star Wars franchise was decent. I still like the first 6 movies more, but I was happy to get more Star Wars content that I could enjoy, unlike the last 3 movies. That one movie from the Witcher franchise, The Nightmare of the Wolf, about Vesemir, was also really nice to watch for me, even though, as a huge fan of the original Witcher books, I was skeptical at first about seeing a story heavily based on Polish folklore to be told through an anime medium, the same way I'm always skeptical about Western productions heavily based on other cultures. But I was proven wrong. I enjoyed it, and my friends, who are also fans of the Witcher franchise, liked it as well. I will leave the Netflix adaptation of The Witcher without a comment though. So I do think anime movies and shows can be a nice addition to various franchises, mostly told via actors-based productions, and I do think people from their fandoms would appreciate more content. It's just, maybe it's better to start small to test things out and learn things first, before diving head first into a production this big. But that's just my opinion on it. My opinion and my attempt at drawing backgrounds, which is still very, very difficult. Any movie definitely does it better than me, but talking about Tolkien books and the like always has me think of sceneric locations and the world of Middle-earth, so I just wanted to try it out. And well, that was longer than planned and probably a bit too serious at times, but I'm quite passionate about Lord of the Rings and Tolkien stories as a whole, so yeah, that's it. Thank you to anyone watching, and I'll be back with something else next time. Bye!